Hi, this is Troxel. In this tutorial, we're actually going to look at the remove gaps script one more time. I had not planned on doing this, but you'll see why in just a minute. I told you that there was a potential for this one to be significantly slower because it's actually looking at a whole lot more frames than the previous one did. And it's going through the events a whole lot of times where the other one didn't. So I thought, let's take one more look at this and see if we can't speed the new version up so that it runs as well as the old version did. So first of all, let's take a look and see what we've got here. To see the issue, we've really got to look at a much larger project. So here we have a much larger project on the timeline, and let's run the original script. As you can see, it was virtually instantaneous in its completion. Now let's run the new version that we just created in the last two tutorials. That time it took about 22 seconds on my machine. So definitely significantly slower. 22 seconds is definitely not as fast as we want it to be, especially since the other version was instantaneous. So let's see what we can do to change that. One thing I decided was it's going through a lot of events a lot of times, and so I thought, well, let's keep track of what's the last event that I found that was too far, and then I can store that, and then instead of starting at the beginning every time, I can just start at that position, and then I'm only going through a handful of events each time. So what I did was I created an array here. It's an integer array, which I called last event, and I made it an array so that I could have one for each track. Now, if you're going to have more than 1,000 tracks, you're going to have a problem, but you shouldn't have more than 1,000 tracks. Then I created me a little for loop here for I equals 0, while I is less than my vegas.project.tracks.count. I'm going to increment I, and I'm going to set the last event for track I equal to 0. So that will initialize the array for the number of tracks I have. I don't need to go all the way to 1,000 if I only have 2 tracks. So this should be very negligible in the length of time it takes. Then we want to come on down to our check found under this frame routine. And here is some more changes that I made. Here I have an integer which I've set total events equals mytrack.events.count. Then this was a for each going through the events on the track. What I've changed it to now is a for loop that's an integer, and then I'm getting the last event for this track is where I'm going to start, and then as long as I'm less than the total events, I'm going to increment by 1. And then I have to set a new track event variable called myEvent equal to mytrack.eventsj. So this is the next event on that track. So I'm only looking at the next event. Then down here, this is where we had our break before. What I've done is I've gotten rid of the break, but what I've done is set the last event that we've been looking at for this track is J. And then I'm setting J equals to total events. That way J will be equal to total events, so it's no longer less than, so it's not going to go through this loop anymore. So as soon as we find the first event that outside the range we're looking at, it's going to save that information, and then it's going to jump out of the loop. So with those few changes, let's see what it does. As you can see, this time, instead of being closer to 20 to 22 seconds, This time it took about 2 seconds, so definitely significantly faster, but it's still slower than the other one. Let's see if we can't speed it up even more. When we're going through this loop, we're basically going through every frame in the project. Now, we are skipping the frames that have events on them. In the other routine, we found a way to skip over those, that if there is no frame for, say, 100 frames, we're looking at 100 frames. So what I thought was, okay, in the other routine, we're finding where the next event is. Why not use that information to be able to jump to that next event and skip all the empty frames in the middle? So now I've set a time code called next event, and I just set it to null. Then at the beginning of each time through this loop, I'm going to set the next event equal to myvegas.project.length. In other words, let's assume, worst case scenario, it's at the end of the project. Best case scenario, we're going to find an event much closer to where we're looking. All of this is still the same, still the same, still the same, until we get down to here. And then I'm going to set my I equals to next event dot frame count. So basically, we're going to be changing our I variable here, jumping over several frames. But let's see how we got this next event set. Down here, we have modified this where if our event start is greater than where we're looking, this is the first time it's greater than where we're looking. If the event start is less than next event, then I'm going to set my next event equal to my event.start. So basically, as I hit each event, the first time it's going to say, well, did this event start before the end of the project? Obviously it did, so it's going to set that. Well, let's say we found one on the next track that started even farther left, so the gap was shorter. It's going to change it to that event. Let's say the event on the next track was after this event. Well, it's not going to change it in that case because the start will not be less than next event. And then this is what we changed the previous time. So this is new to this version. And so let's save this and then run this new version. So as you can see, it is now instantaneous as well. So by skipping having to process each one of the blank areas one by one, frame by frame, we have now reached the speed of the original tutorial. So I do plan on this being the final version of this series of tutorials. This will be a part 3. The other one was a part 4, and so that will be 7 parts dedicated to this one topic. But I think this is good to see how we can modify scripts to make them faster, look at things from a different angle. So we've actually looked at how to perform this task from 2 different angles. We found the second one was much slower, but then we found ways to speed it up. And often there are ways to speed things up if you go in and look at the code. I hope you have liked this series of tutorials. Let me know what you'd like to see in future tutorials. And subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Please sign up at www.jettv.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.